My name is Marianne Nation. I am the workforce, I should say, as the training and development specialist there. And today we'll be presenting the titled presentation, Contributions of the African Diaspora. So I hope you all will enjoy the presentation today, okay? I'm gonna try very carefully to speak slowly. I'm a fast speaker. Well, the purpose of the cultural gatherings is to increase awareness related to cultural practice, key demographics, cultural values, the family, and child development, education, and privilege. Okay? So that's just some of the basic reasons why we are doing the cultural gatherings. Our driver is a cultural competency is a process that requires individual and systems to develop and to expand their ability to know about the sensitivity to and to have respect for cultural and linguistic diversity, okay? So that's one of the drivers we have here at LAUP, and the cultural gatherings will be focusing on that particular driver. Okay, I'm happy to say the committee for Black History Month is quite large. We have Angel, we have Eva, Jametta, Keisha Lynn, Michael, Shelley, myself, Melita, Relda, Dawn, Michelle, Letitia, Dean, Christine, Helen Chavez, Sharon, as well as Christine Wilson. Okay? Oh, you are. I'll delete that later. Okay. Just to let you know, Black History Month tends to be a month in which often we focus on Black history within the U.S. This month, we're going to be making a little bit a larger expand. We're going to be focusing on the African diaspora. I'm going to be getting in a little later what is the African diaspora. So we're going to be looking at the contribution of the diaspora and what it has contributed to the U.S. and the world. We'll also be looking at we'll also be increasing knowledge of the demographic history and culture of Black in the U.S., as well as we're going to be having a lecturer coming in next week and a few weeks in talking about the Black family and some other topics. This is quite small, so I'm just going to point out some key issues or what we'll be exploring. The first week, we're focusing on the diaspora. What is the diaspora? And I'm not going to go very long into that. The second week, we're focusing on the family, okay, the Black family. The third week, we're going to be looking at contribution of diaspora in music, literature, and dance, and why the arts are truly important for the empowerment of young people. The fourth week, we're going to be concentrating on Blacks in education, and we're going to have an exciting speaker, Dr. Keith Claiborne, coming in speaking about Blacks in the education system, as well as we'll be having a presentation from, oh, much better, from Keisha Lynn and Shelley on historically Black universities. How many of you know what a historic Black university is? Okay, great. So those of you who do not, we're going to be having a presentation on that. Okay. Next, Angel is going to be coming up and presenting Black History Month.
Good afternoon, everyone. Now, I know most of us are familiar with Black History Month, and we've celebrated it for quite some time in elementary school, in high school, and in college. And so we have an idea that the purpose of Black History Month is to celebrate the accomplishments of African Americans. But I just want to share a bit of the origin of the month with you. Dr. Carter G. Woodson actually founded Black History Week in 1926, and he selected February, or actually the second week of February, to celebrate it because it was the birthday, or marked the birthday of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. And they greatly contributed to the Black population during the anti-slavery period. And so he thought that it was very important to have a week dedicated to Black accomplishments. Dr. Woodson actually worked on his parents, or actually in the, I'm sorry, I'm losing it, just a moment, guys. Okay. He worked most of his childhood outside on his parents' plantation, and he moved on to go to high school much later in life, about 20 years old. And he graduated within 2 years and went on to earn a PhD from Harvard. And throughout his studies, he found that there was not much literature available there was not much literature available or much positive representations of African Americans, and so he thought it was very important to write that history to include the positive accomplishments, and hence he started Black History Week, which was later expanded to a full month in 1976. And I just want to say a brief word about Frederick Douglass as well. Frederick Douglass was a key inspiration for Dr. Woodson, and Frederick Douglass was actually born to a slave and a white unknown father, and he was able to escape slavery after his second attempt, and he fled to Europe while a fugitive and was not able to return to the United States until he was bought out of slavery by some white abolitionists. When he came back to the U.S., he began the North Star, which was an abolitionist review and newspaper, and he promoted the cause of anti-slavery, but then he also reached out to other oppressed groups to make sure that their cause had a forum and they could express their views and let America know their struggles. So he also incorporated the feminist movement during that period. And just a note, his wife was illiterate, and he did hire folks to come in and try to teach her to read, but she never really learned. And so he thought that it was very important that women move on and become very educated, and so that's in part why he championed the feminist movement.
Just to give you a little introduction to Kwanzaa. Basically, Kwanzaa stands for the first fruit. It's a celebration of African heritage that was started in 1996. It's based on 7 community-oriented principles, and it includes a variety of observances. It starts on December 26th, and it ends January 1st. The 7 principles, bear with me, are Umoja, Kujidakalia, Ujima, Ujama, Nia, Kumba, and Imani. They stand for unity, self-determination, collective work and responsibility, cooperative economics, purpose, creativity, and faith. And beside them, you can see their meanings.
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about Umoja. And Umoja actually means unity, and it often means unity of the family or one's community. And the reason I want to talk about Umoja, because it leads right into the African diaspora. The African diaspora, let me just first say, what is a diaspora? Someone asked that question. It's the dispersion of people from their original homeland. So a diaspora, most people know of the Jewish diaspora, the 12 tribes of Jewish tribes. Well, guess what? The Africans have a diaspora as well, which they can be seen throughout the world. In parts of Asia, Southeast Asia, Europe, Africa, the Caribbean, South America, and so on, the Americas. Just to let you know about the African diaspora, in 2005, the African Union actually met because they wanted to determine, guess what? We have many Africans across the world, so how do we define them? And after a 3-day meeting, this is what they actually came up to, that the diaspora is any person of African descent, which was pre-slave trade, the slave trade, post-trade slave trade, as well as modern migration. So their definition has expanded anyone and everyone who has any African origins to be part of their family. Most people tend to believe the diaspora for many years that the diaspora is those Africans from slavery who came to the Americas. So for many years, people have always thought of diaspora as being Black Americans, Black South Americans, Black Caribbeans, but actually now, as of 2005, the African Union has a new definition of what the diaspora is.
The area that I'm going to focus on is just different civilizations and how where Africans were involved in civilizations before slavery. The first area would be African civilization in Western Asia. There has been much confusion as to where the Cimarron's original homeland was. However, through much research, anthropologists have proven that they are from the African heritage. And by that, the description being of their African descent, as well as from their facial expressions and features. They also, based on their descriptions, used, they were dark-skinned. Research has shown that they have African heritage, as I just alluded to. African presence in India. Men of almost every color were found in India, which they can be distinguished by their African features as well. They had domesticated animals such as cattle, elephants, sheep. They also were able to, were the first ones as far as building two-story buildings. They built underground sewers and as well as boats. Their most notable creation was making iron rust-proof. So in this slide here, this slide was over 40,000 years without any rust being shown in the thing, in the column. This also, the tribes of Western Sudan speak dialects related to African Chinese. So there was a relationship between the Sudanese as well as as China. The Nile Valley civilization, the Nile River has been called the cradle of civilization. The first inhabitants of this area were the Ethiopians, which also black-skinned people whose descendants entered the valley through Nubia following the Nile River. It was also, they had a lot of foundation as far as their astrology, music, medicine, and chemistry also came from this region. Egyptian philosophy. From the time of the pharaoh of the 3rd dynasty to Pharaoh Khufu, Chupas of the 4th dynasty, who built the Great Pyramids of Giza. As you can see, superior intellect of this ancient African people had a great understanding of mathematics and knowledge of the heavens and the sun with relationships to the stars. African Economic Organization, most of it came through bartering. And so what they would do is, in exchange for relationships, were governed by the barter system. And this was pretty much the commercial foundation for their moving their goods. One example of it would be that the traders would bring in their goods and they would sit it down in a certain place. Then the ones that would come to purchase, they would actually come stand next to one of the bundles and they would leave either gold dust or pieces of cattle or things like that and take the bundle. Well, what they would feel would be worth the amount of imports that was being left. The other ones would come back and they would pick up those bundles to see if they left enough money, enough gold dust for bartering for that material. And if it wasn't, then they would come back, bring it back. And so it just kept going until they got an even exchange for the merchandise that was being left. Okay, Akhenaten, the Herod king, lived around 1386 BC. He's believed to have preached and lived the gospel of love, brotherhood, and truth 1,300 years before Christ. He was also credited for being the first idealist. And these are just some information that I'm just going to share with you. Askia the Great, Muhammad Tori, came into power in 1493, established Songhai into the most powerful state in Western Sudan. Now for Christianity, all of the research gathered on the very difficult subject of Christianity leads one to believe that the origins of the ancient Central Africa, which was the Tawa people, which was over 40,000 years ago. Joshua ben Pandora, or Jesus as it was called, was a native of Africa and was educated in Egyptian mystery schools, according to the mystery system. And it's also believed that Moses was also educated the same way. The Roman Empire. Many people are not aware of the African influence on the Roman Empire and the Roman Church. There was 3 popes during the Roman Empire, one being Pope Victor I, who came into power at the time that Easter was a great controversy. And he was the one who established Easter to be, the decision was made for Easter to be on Sundays. The next one was Meletius, and he was the first pope who had an official residence. And it was under his reign that Constantine was converted to Christianity. The third pope was Gelasius, who was born in Rome to African parents. As pope, he arranged several of the hymns and also the speeches or sermons that are now still being used in some of the Catholic churches. And also I found that he was the one who allowed the use of wine in the Holy Communion. It was said that Rome fell because they opened their doors to too many African dignitaries, state leaders. And actually Rome they said that it fell because the interior had weakened and the soldier and the army had started deteriorating. The Queen of Sheba. She is also referred to as Makeda and Belkis. She is one of 2 black queens mentioned in the Bible. Cleopatra. She is commonly referred to as white, but was neither white nor Greek. Married to Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony. She committed suicide upon her death, and we've seen many movies in relation to Cleopatra and the Queen of Sheba. Mansa Musa, Emperor of Mali, conquered the Songhai Empire, and he also rebuilt the University of Sankore. Moors in Spain. During the Arab invasion of Morocco, there was a great general known as Gabriel Tariq, and he met Count Julian. And Count Julian was at odds with Roderick, the King of Spain. So Count Julian encouraged Tariq to invade Spain. So in 711 AD, General Tariq, he took a group of army men as well as horses into Spain, and that's when they kind of ravaged the country and went back. Later they came back with over 7,000 Africans, and then that's when they took over the peninsula and thus begun the Moorish domination of Spain. Great buildings that were built during that time, and also a lot of education came through the Moorish people in the country of Spain. Columbus. I think as we know and have known from, especially from our education, that Columbus was the one who discovered America, and that's what we've been taught. In there have been a lot of controversy in who actually discovered America. What has been said was that when Columbus even sailed the ship, it was sailed and navigated through the experience of Africans. And the Africans had already started trading with the Native Americans before Columbus came to America.
Okay. This next slide is called The Lost Africans of Asia. And you might be wondering, why am I calling them lost? It's just because recently, through studying of music, a lot of the music and dance that are in certain countries in Southeast Asia can be traced back, the languages and the dance can be traced back to Africa. First, I'm going to start talking about Bangladesh. In the writings from Horan Tudu, he claims that before slavery, Africans migrated south. And so quite a few had ended up in India and other locations throughout Southeast Asia. So all the people that we're talking about in his writings are pre-slave trade. But also, many of you might not know, but there was also an Arab slave trade before the Atlantic slave trade. And through the Arab slave trade, I'm just going to go onward. Many people were sent throughout Southeast Asia, brought through what we consider the Middle East and Northern Africa. So many countries such as Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, Sudan, and the list goes on. Many of these people were brought to these countries through the Arab slave trade. What was very interesting that I learned through doing this research is that once these slaves converted to Islam, they could no longer be slaves, because in Islam, you cannot enslave your brethren. So that means they had to go right back down to Nigeria, which was the area they went to, and enslave more people. So today, which was a very interesting fact, that half of the Arab world exists in Africa, which I thought was quite interesting. And that in a country like Sudan, in which most of them consider themselves Arab, because now it's very hard to distinguish. I mean, what do you identify yourself as? Am I African? Am I Arab? So this differentiation doesn't exist. So most people consider themselves either Berbers, or they consider themselves Afro-Arabs, or just Arabs in general. But 40% of the Sudan is made up of what we would consider Afro-Arabs.
The slide is titled Ethiopia and Eritrea. You can't talk about one without at least mentioning the other, but my focus is mainly Eritrea. Eritrea shares a border with Ethiopia, and it's located in the northern, what they call Horn of Africa. The capital is Asmara, and there's a strong Italian and British influence in Eritrea because in the late 1800s, Italy actually started the colonization in southern Eritrea. After World War II, Britain took away their local infrastructure and stole it as souvenirs and took it back home with them. In 1950, the United Nations declared Eritrea was better off being a part of Ethiopia. As a result, Eritrea's economy was drained and a new national language replaced their native language. Eritrea struggled for 30 years to regain independence from Ethiopia, and that 30-year war it goes down in history as the longest war in Africa. In 1991, Eritrea defeated Ethiopia, which was a much larger army, and the country was rebuilt and introduced laws to ensure women's rights and tried to make friends with Ethiopia, but the fighting resumed shortly when Eritrea rejected the Ethiopian money. In 2000, there was a ceasefire, and a piece of neutral land maintains and is monitored by the United Nations. There are two official languages in Eritrea, Tigrinya and Arabic. Their religion is almost equally divided between Muslim and the Orthodox Christian Eritrean religion. The per capita income is about $220 US. The main exports are fish, hides, and salt, and their cuisine is injera, which is like a flatbread, and some kind of meat stew, called sepis. The education in Eritrea, formal education, I should say, begins when children are 6 years old, and that's equivalent to like the first grade. The elementary school is taught in the mother tongue, and middle school begins in the 6th grade, and that's taught in English. Secondary school, which is equivalent to like our high school, begins in the 8th grade, and all students must take an exit exam. There is one university, and there are 3 professional institutes. For the elementary students, the teachers actually have to attend some professional institute in order to be considered qualified to teach the students there. After secondary school, all of the students must attend an annual summer work program where they try to enforce and learn about work ethic, social habits, improving national awareness, appreciation of diversity, national unity, and building self-reliance. And just to tag on to the end, I chose Eritrea because if you noticed in the diaspora slide, they talked about, as a result of the war, many Eritreans were displaced. And my first year out of school teaching, I had about 5 Eritrean students, and there was this one little girl that stood out. Her name was Bikrat Zudi, and I could not determine whether or not there was a language difference or an actual special need. And so that was my first experience with special needs and not really knowing the difference or not really being able to determine what appropriate services would be for her. And so for me, that's why I chose Eritrea. And then one last thing, you noticed also in the diaspora side that there are a significant amount of Eritrean Jews. And they're called Beta Israel. I won't go into that, but that's going to be discussed in a later presentation.
I'm going to be talking about Nigeria. The reason why I selected Nigeria is because I've had a number of students enrolled in my class at Trade Technical College who were actually from Nigeria, and participating in Black History Month has allowed me to take the time to enhance my knowledge to have a better understanding of the culture. Nigeria is actually located in West Africa, and it has the greatest population of all African countries. The flag symbolizes 2 things: the green, which stands for harvest, and the white, which actually represents peace and unity. Okay, the diaspora. The Europeans discovered southern areas along the coast in approximately 15 centuries. The Portuguese basically sailed there, and they had explored that area, and they settled there. They started a slave trade, and it grew for about 300 and some years. The British, the Dutch, and the Europeans basically forced a number of Nigerians into slavery. And from this, the coast is known to become a slave coast. The education system. In doing research on Nigeria, I thought it was really unique regarding their education. They have several different levels of education. The education is basically free from the government. And the first level is the nursery school. Basically, it's like our preschool programs. And that school level, children are introduced to ABCs, alphabets. The second level is called the primary school level, and that's grades from 1 through 6, and that's equivalent to elementary school. The third level is the secondary school, which is equivalent to our high school over here. The junior secondary school, that lasts approximately 3 years. And then their last level of school is called the senior school, which lasts for approximately 3 years. And one of my students actually indicated that the junior and senior level is equivalent to our JC over here. After senior school, students take an exam to determine whether or not they would enter into college. And doing research on the colleges, they have a number of colleges over there, and if they do not pursue college, then they have other trades or either work and do things around the house. Food. What I discovered is that Nigerians really love yams. Everything is introduced with rice, and they enjoy pepper sauce. And with the pepper sauce, they incorporate a lot of meat, fish, or either chicken. And a lot of their foods are very hot and spicy. The languages. In one article,